You've definitely seen this face before, right? It's on key-shirts, posters, murals. It's probably one of the most famous images of the entire 20th century, a true symbol of rebellion. But the story behind that icon, well, it's way more complicated and honestly way more contradictory than you might think. So let's get into it. Let's unpack the life of Che Guevara, the man and the myth. These were his last words. Can you imagine staring down your own executioner in a dusty little schoolhouse in Bolivia? They are defiant, legendary words from a guy who just knew his death wasn't going to be the end of the story. In a way, it was really just the beginning of the myth. And what a myth it is, because it has these two completely different sides. For millions of people, he is a hero, a freedom fighter who stood up to imperialism. But for so many others, he's a ruthless terrorist who was in charge of executions and even concentration camps. So the big question is, how can one person possibly be both? To really understand the revolutionary, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to meet the man he was before all of that, Ernesto Guevara. And here's the first surprise. He wasn't born into poverty. Not at all. He was born into privilege. His journey from a comfortable life to becoming this global symbol of revolution is, well, it's pretty incredible.
So Ernesto grows up in Argentina. He's from an upper-middle-class family. Their house had a library with over 3,000 books. He goes off to study medicine. But then, in 1952, he decides to hit pause on his studies, grabs a buddy, and they hop on a motorcycle to go on a trip that would literally change everything.
What he saw on that 8,000-mile journey across Latin America just completely shocked him. This is the trip that later became famous in the Motorcycle Diaries. It opened his eyes to the brutal, everyday reality for most people. Just this crushing poverty, the exploitation of workers, and this massive, massive gap between the rich and the poor. The doctor in training started to see a sickness that no medicine could cure, and he decided he'd found the cause: capitalism. His new political fire really got lit in Guatemala, where he actually saw a CIA-backed coup overthrow a democratically elected government. He had to flee to Mexico, and by this point, he was fully radicalized. And it's there that he meets two brothers who would seal his fate, Fidel and Raul Castro. He signs on to their cause to liberate Cuba, and that's the moment Ernesto the doctor becomes Che the revolutionary. So, the Castro brothers' plan was to overthrow Cuba's dictator, Fulgencio Batista, who was backed by the United States. And their big strategy? Guerrilla warfare. You know, this is the ultimate underdog tactic. It's all about small, scrappy units using surprise attacks and local know-how to take down a much bigger, slower army. It was a strategy Che was about to become a master of. In this strategy, up in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, this is where you really see the two sides of Che. I mean, after a totally disastrous first invasion, the few rebels who survived had to regroup. On one hand, you have Che the builder. He brilliantly wins over the local people by setting up schools and clinics. But on the other hand, he becomes the revolution's iron fist. He enforced brutal discipline, executing suspected traitors and deserters, often with zero proof. And guess what? It worked. That tiny group of rebels grew into a full-blown army. With the people behind them, they swept down from the mountains. And on New Year's Day, 1959, the dictator Batista gets on a plane and flees. Castro's revolutionaries march right into Havana as victors. The impossible had happened. Their little guerrilla campaign had toppled an entire government. Of course, with victory comes power. Che wasn't just a guerrilla fighter anymore. He was one of the main architects of the new Cuba, and he was about to use that power to completely remake the country, leading to some achievements that inspired millions, and some actions that would forever stain his name. I mean, look at this. As Castro's number two, Che had huge responsibilities. He was put in charge of the notorious La Cabaña prison, where he oversaw the trials and executions of hundreds of people from the old regime. Then he's made president of the National Bank and Minister of Industry. His job was to basically tear down Cuba's old economy and rebuild it from scratch along communist lines. Now, you have to give credit where it's due. Some of the revolution's social programs were undeniably successful. Just like he did in the mountains, Che put a huge focus on education. He led this massive literacy campaign that, in just one single year, took Cuba's literacy rate from about 60% all the way up to an incredible 96%. But behind these successes was this very rigid, very uncompromising ideology. See, Che wasn't just trying to build a new economy, he was trying to build a new man. This was his ideal communist citizen, someone totally selfless, driven by duty to the group, not by personal gain. And if people wouldn't become this new man willingly, well, they'd be forced to. And this is, without a doubt, the darkest chapter of his story. To make his vision a reality, Che set up Cuba's very first system of concentration camps. They were called re-education camps. Anyone who was seen as a threat to the revolution, dissidents, priests, even homosexuals, was sent there and subjected to forced labor. The whole point was to break their will and remold them into his idea of a new man. But for Che, the Cuban Revolution was never enough. It was just the first step. He truly believed that capitalism had to be destroyed everywhere, all over the globe. So in 1965, he just gave it all up. He quit his powerful jobs in Cuba and left to go spread revolution abroad. He became a guerrilla fighter all over again. But he could never recapture that magic from Cuba. His campaign in the Congo was a total disaster. Still, he didn't give up. He moved on to Bolivia. But the situation was all wrong. The local people never got on board. And this time, the CIA was actively helping the Bolivian army hunt him down. On October 8, 1967, after a brutal firefight, an injured Che Guevara was captured. His life as a revolutionary was over. They held him overnight in that little schoolhouse, and the next day, the order came from the Bolivian High Command: execute him. And just like that, the man was dead. But his death was the catalyst. It was the thing that transformed him from a failed guerrilla in Bolivia into an immortal global icon. The myth was about to be born. Think about those final words again. You are only going to kill a man. It's almost like he saw it coming, right? He knew that they could destroy his body, but his image, his ideas, they were about to take on a life of their very own. The Bolivian government actually tried to prove he was really gone. They even cut off his hands to get his fingerprints. But when Fidel Castro announced his death, it turned Che into a martyr. Decades later, his remains were finally found and brought back to Cuba for a hero's burial. Statues were built, the man was gone, but the symbol was more powerful than ever. So we land right back where we started. Hero or villain? Maybe the reason that face, that image, is still so powerful is because the answer is yes, he's both. He stands for this powerful and, maybe dangerous idea that a better world is possible and that it's worth fighting for, that injustice can actually be beaten. The man is long gone, but the myth makes us ask a question that never gets old. To build that better world, what price is too high?